Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Again, we are recording this July 5th for posting on July 12th. This is part B. What did Mr. Greg Dickerson and I do after the crash? How you doing, sir?
Doing great, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for doing 4 videos with us today. I know that's a big commitment, so thank you very much. First off,
It's all good. Always enjoy these conversations.
awesome. Well, now let's talk about what happened to our business after the crash. In part A, you talked about having a roughly $30 million in construction loans out. You had some financing up. Turns out the banks didn't come through for you. So let's talk about what happened to Mr. Greg Dickerson after the market rolled over.
So yeah, it was crazy. Markets were crashing, banks were disappearing, all those types of things. So number one, I had to shift my business model. So I switched from building, multi-million-dollar beach houses to building little 130, back then they were $135,000 spec houses. So I'd buy a lot for 25, 30 grand. I'd build the house. Actually, the house probably cost me 110 to 120,000 to build. And you could sell them depending on the location from 250 to 300. So my kitchens used to cost more than that in the beach houses I was building. I would spend 100 grand on cabinetry and countertops. Wow. And now I'm building these houses. So that was a big business model switch there because there was no work to be had. You couldn't get any work at a building company. Nobody was, working on the houses. Nobody was building, everything was coming to an end. And fortunately, because I had assets, I still had equity in my properties on paper. I couldn't sell anything, but except for these smaller houses, you could sell those, but you couldn't sell the big ones. But I had good income coming in, had a business with cash flow. So I could still borrow money from the banks, to build these houses. And then I was just using cash too, as well, because the banks were only loaning so much during this time. They pulled back big time.
Oh, yeah.
But I had a good little business model and I'd do 12, 13 of those, 15 of those a year. And, they were nice little cash flow. It was a good little business model. But, the other properties I had, like I said, I had permanent mortgage commitments, to take out the construction financing on these homes. And they were $1 million here, $2 million there. I had some commercial properties for $3-4 million, things like that. And I had to work through those because the banks, they called all the loans, like they do on anything. I had some developments going and, they called development loans. They called all those loans. So then you go into a workout situation and you work it out with the bank to either, put it on their, book and carry it in their portfolio for a while. Some of the banks were getting takeover, so some couldn't do it. So we just had to kind of work through all that. Some of the assets got sold. I had to give some of them back to the banks, but I had no equity at risk. I'd pulled all the equity out. I had, no personal guarantees. It was all, asset based. Mm-hmm. So with some of the banks, the conversation was, look, we're getting taken over or we're going out of business. Like one of my main banks, Gateway Bank, they had bought a bunch of a Bank of America stock and they had to go bankrupt because the stock tanked. Wow. So, they bought it right before the market crashed. It was amazing. Took an entire, $400 or $500 million bank out, I think that's what they were at the time. A regional bank, but they were lending a lot of money. So, they couldn't do anything. They said, look, we're done. We're bankrupt. We have to clean the book. So, so they said, look, we'll take the keys and you can walk away and everything's good. Yeah. So I had a few of those that I had to do that with. Some of them I was able to keep and sell. But it was just really hard. These properties were selling, for $2-3 million that were doing 150, 200,000 in rent. All of a sudden there were no buyers. You couldn't sell them. Nobody was buying them. You couldn't get loans to do those things. It was a very, very interesting time. Foreclosures were just all over down there. That was the problem. Everybody was losing their houses, getting foreclosed on. So it was just crazy times. And it took from 08, 09 until probably what year? We're in 2021 now, probably 2017 to 2019. Actually, it was more like 2018, 2019 before it really started coming back down there.
Yeah. It's funny you bring up financing because that's the thing that I remember most. Right. So we at the right before the peak, again, we got lucky or fortunate or whatever you want to call it. We were in multifamily, right? We were sitting with about 80 units in multifamily, 5s to 20s. That's all I've ever owned. And the market rolls over and suddenly we're seeing houses like what I bought for the first 6 years being sold for 50% less than I had bought other houses for. Right. And I remember finding a nice house in a great area, right? Class A area of Fresno. And I'm like, honey, I don't know where the market's going, but if we own that for 30 years, we'll be happy. Right. Because again, market was falling like 3, 4, 5% a month.
We saw 50% markdowns in probably the year 2009. March of 2009 was the bottom. So from that until probably the end of the year, 2009, 2010, we lost probably 50% equity in all of our properties.
It's just, it was so, they were just, it was like dominoes.
50% of the value. I'm sorry. We lost 50% of the value of all the properties.
Right.
I lost all my equity. Gone.
Yeah. Gone. Yeah, that's right. Folks, you realize quickly you don't spend net worth, because we saw our net worth take a hit as well, but cash flow was fine. But yeah, that was the biggest thing I remember. Is I remember walking into a bank confident, like damn near cocky, that I was going to buy a house for 30 or 40% less than I thought it was worth, because it was actually in decent condition. Today, it would probably pass financing conditions. It wasn't like some of the junk I bought that would never pass. But I walked into a bank cocky. We were willing to put 25, even 30% down on this. I think it was like 140, 150. And the bank, who had all our money, had all our track record, decades of experience, never missed a payment, told us politely, no, we were real estate investors. And I didn't know they could do that. I honestly did not know that a bank could say no, right? Good credit, good income. I'm an idiot for thinking that, but I was just shocked. They turned off. They just,
they can say no even when you own the property.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was naive. I just didn't know that. And that was a wake-up call. But when I went to the second bank, which I had only a small relationship with because they had some of our other investment loans, and they told us, F no, right? Like, get out of here. You're evil, right? I remember him saying, we consider real estate investors the problem, and we are not doing business with people like you. I'm like, people like me? What are you trying to say?
It was really interesting, because I had a bunch of loans with Bank of America. I don't know, 4, 5, 6 million bucks, maybe 10. I can't even remember now. It was a number of houses. And, Bank of America was huge. And I was talking to the, vice president of the region, about working through my loans and working them out. And I'm like, you guys are one of the largest banks in the world. Just put these things on your, on your, portfolio short term. I said, they have great cash flow. They're not selling right now. The equity's gone. And they said, no, they said, according to the loan guidelines, when the equity reaches the limits beyond what the loan docs call for, in other words, it was worth less, had less equity than what the loan was done at, 80-20 or whatever it was. They said, we have to call the loans, so it's technical default. And they're like, so, I had all that triggering, and that's what was happening to everybody. It was developers all over the country that were having to give back subdivisions, because of technical default, because the values of the properties dropped below the covenants in the loan. You're supposed to maintain a certain amount of equity. And, at that time I wasn't going to pay them off.
No way. Why would you? No, take them. Here's the keys.
Values were going down so fast. I was like, that really makes no sense to me for the bank to take these assets back when you have to mark them down. They have to mark them to market. Well, maybe at the time, at that time, they probably weren't forced to do that yet. They were still carrying, that was the key. So that's why they did that, because what happened was, and I went on Dave Ramsey and Neil Cavuto back then on their shows to talk about this very thing. And I was like, it wasn't right, because what they were doing was, it didn't matter to me, but they were taking properties from people that had risk. They had equity tied up in them, and they had guaranteed the loans. So what they were doing was they were taking these things back, calling them in triggering technical default, taking them back, carrying them on their books at value, so that their bank didn't have to take a write down.
I remember
they were destroying people, and then they were going after them for deficiencies. And for the loans, for the balance of the loans. And then if they forgave that, they would tax them. I was like, it was just ridiculous what they were doing. So it was a very, very messed up time. And then I think after that, I don't remember when, but through the whole Dodd-Frank thing and all that, the banks ended up having to mark those assets to market. And that's when Blackstone and all these guys stepped in and started buying all these toxic assets off of the banks, off of the books of the banks, and cleaning that whole mess up. So, that whole thing was set up by Wall Street. Okay. So Wall Street owned, all right, so these rating agencies that rated these mortgage-backed securities were owned by the investment banks that were selling these securities because they were rated, mortgage-backed securities. You take 10 houses, in a neighborhood, and you cut it up into 10 pieces, and you package all those different pieces into a security, and you sell.
I remember.
And you rate it AAA because it's backed by real estate, right? So the chances of a default are slim to none because you have 10 pieces of 10 different houses, or 100 pieces of 100 different houses. That was the thinking behind these derivatives that were created. They derived their value from the underlying asset, multiple of houses. So these rating agencies that were rating these investments were being, were funded by the companies that were selling these assets. that ultimately sold them. And then when they got marked down post 2009 and 10, they ended up buying them back for pennies on the dollar and then reselling them again, later down the road, and or keeping them and renting them out. So it's really interesting how it's almost like they orchestrated the entire thing from the beginning. I know they didn't, nobody wanted that, what happened, but it almost looks like it was completely orchestrated from the beginning, by the banks. And, that's why you saw the banks get called to DC during that time period. Cause like, all right, guys, y'all made this mess.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
the thing to clean it up.
The thing I want to hit again is the loan covenants, because while we talked in part A about the lending environment being very different, single family to single family, before to today, what I see happening right now in commercial multifamily, so 5 units and above, I see a lot of risky behavior in the loan products, interest only, IO periods, bridge debt, all of that stuff. And what people need to realize is cap rates can change, values can go down if you're an LP. And just like you, right? If the values get reset and there could be debt covenants, loans can get called on apartment buildings, or you as an LP have to add more equity. I see a lot of pain in that area because of loan covenants in 2 or 3 years when the interest rates reset. Is that a valid concern?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because so the incentives for the banks are one thing, and what they actually do is another. But generally, it's going to be they're generally not going to go at scale and start triggering technical defaults. It's going to be because of a reason, like you're not making the payments or something's going on, or there's a large systemic risk to the bank that funded the property. Now, most of those loans are bought up by Freddie and Fannie. So the chances of a technical default are slim to none.
Okay.
It would only be in the event that you're not making your payments. Then when they dig into the covenants of a workout, so this is where the covenants come in. When you're working out debt with a lender that's in default or behind, they look at the loan covenants and say, well, you were supposed to maintain certain amount of income. You're supposed to maintain certain condition of the asset. You're supposed to maintain reserves. You stated you had X amount of assets and income. So they look at all that. So when we're in the round that we're in now of potential defaults coming down the road for properties in forbearance, things like that, they're investment properties, the lenders are going to look at those things and they're going to say, well, wait a minute, you said you had X, Y, and Z. You said the income was X, Y, and Z. So explain to me why those have changed, why that's different, and why we should rework this loan.
Yep.
They're either going to or they're not, depending on where the bank stands from their restrictions and things like that will determine, whether or not they can work that out. Then when you get into CMBS and all that, it's a whole different animal because all those have been packaged up and sold off as security. So they can't work that debt out.
Nope.
They have to just take the property back. So
yeah, loan covenants are a real deal. Not enough people look at them. Not enough people experienced the pain last time to realize that, what, banks really can take properties back.
And well, it's just like subject to. So there's people out there teaching, subject to, which is a great strategy. It's on the HUD-1 statement, taking property, subject to the existing mortgage. So it's a legal thing, but it triggers technical default. Technically, from the loan covenants, from the loan documents, you cannot transfer title to a property without paying the loan off. So that triggers technical default. Now, in general, as long as loans are being paid, the bank, will not do that. And, that's the other thing. Like a lot of people are teaching that subject to, like it's taking over the mortgage, taking over the payments. You're not taking over the mortgage or the payments. You're taking title to the property. The mortgage and the payments stay in place with the original owner. You're just making those payments. Yeah. So that's a big thing to differentiate. Because like I said, there's some people out there teaching this wrong, and packaging it wrong to people in terms of what you're actually doing. But it is a good strategy. And I've taught people how to do it the right way. Because you got to maintain the insurance and, those types of things and all that. But yeah, it triggers technical default and it can happen easy. And we saw it happen in 08, 09, but it created a systemic issue within the banks that they're not going to let happen at scale this go around. If something like that were to happen, and there really isn't a problem. I mean, what do we have in forbearance? 1 million houses or something, if that many. And most of those are coming out successfully, either in a refinance, a sale, or they're just paying it off. Very small percentage are actually going to a short sale. Almost none of them are going to foreclosure.
Yeah, I don't see any pain in the single family market. My pain is 2 or 3 years down the line in multifamily. I just see some deals being done today. I get a lot of them, and I'm like, I can't believe people are paying these prices and signing up for. The classic thing is we're going to do 2 years of IO, interest only, into a debt structure. It's a bridge debt, so we have to refi in 2 years, and I just see higher rates. I see lower NOIs, and it just it just
Yeah, 2
freaks me
years
out.
not enough time. Anybody going into interest only should be minimum of 5 years. 7 to 10 is even better. Grant Cardone does 10 years, I think, on most of his deals. Interest only, and when you're doing a lot of deals, you can get a better rate for that. Generally, the longer the term, the higher the rate's going to be.
Sure.
For interest only, which makes zero sense. It should be lower for longer term to incentivize you to keep it because the bank's making money. But anyways,
cool.
yeah, you'll see some of those coming down the pike because people are overpaying.
Oh yeah.
They're overestimating how quickly they can increase income and refinance a property. And, that commercial debt will be the first thing that gets the most difficult to refinance if we have an issue.
I agree. I lived through it once, so it's going to be fun. So Greg, thank you for doing this part A, part B. We will talk again live in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Where can people find you?
Yep. GregDickerson.com. All my info is there. YouTube channel, podcast, GregDickerson.com.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, man.